You had an individual come to you when you were 18, an anthropologist was there, a psychiatrist was there, a social worker was there, and a doctor was there. And what they wanted to do was they wanted to scan your brain and put you on a treadmill for 5 minutes and then check your heart, scan your heart. And they wanted to sit you down with a psychiatrist and ask you all of these questions about your youth and your life and what you think about and what worries you and your political where you are politically, and they ask you about your childhood, and they go through and they dissect all these different parts of your life. So they scanned your body, they checked your brain, they checked your heart. The psychiatrist is there to examine your mind and see exactly what your mental faculties are. And then they put you with a social worker, and the social worker gets into all of the parts of your life and things that maybe you want to do or things that you don't tell everybody. And after they're done with you, they take all of this information and they record it and they put it in a book or in a binder. And now I want you to think about if they did that every year for 10 years. If they took all this information, how many of y'all remember what it was like to be 18 when everything was tight? I mean, I remember when it was all tight. It was just like skin was tight, had all this collagen in it, and it didn't matter what you ate. Like you could just eat taquitos and burritos and flamingos. I don't know. You could eat whatever you want, right? You could just everything was tight, right? And at 18, how many of y'all know your aspirations are at 18? You just want to be rich, right? It's like, what do I want to be? I don't want to grow up rich. That's what I mean, what do you want to do? I want to do rich, right? That's what, right, whenever you're 18. But they do that for you every year until you're 28. Now I want you to imagine that they did it every year for 40 years. Every year you met with these people and they stripped you down butt naked and they measured every measurement of your body. They measured your arms. Boy, it would be depressing, wouldn't it? Whoo, man, it's like, golly. It's like, well, actually, my arms have gotten bigger over the years. It's like, yeah, but the wrong kind of big, baby. It's like everything went from up top down to the bottom. How many of y'all know what I'm talking about? They're measuring the sag, right? And I'm 40 years from the time you're 18 to the time that you're 58, they measure your ears. They measure your nose. They measure they take body measurements of your whole body. And then, so now we've gone 40 years. Now I want you to add another 35 years to it. Think about if they did this for 75 years of your life. And they kept all of it recorded to study you. You're the mouse running on the wheel in the lab. Except you're running your life, right? You're just going, bringing the kids to the PTA, and then you watch them graduate, and you walk them down the aisle, and you see some of them that maybe had to be buried, or you had to bury a loved one or a spouse. And these people there are every year in your life recording and asking you about all of it. Think about the ups and downs of your life, just if you're in your 40s or if you're in your 60s. Think about where you were at 18 and 28 and 38 and 48 and 58. And if these individuals were there and they had long questionnaires that they would ask you about all of the things that happened that year, and they kept up with it and they chronologically kept it in binders year after year after year after year. And on November 1st, 1938, they took 238 sophomores out of college, and they did this to those 238 sophomores, and they're still doing it today. It's been going over 80 years. They've been meeting with these people every year. Now many of them obviously have died, and now they're meeting with their wives that are left and with their kids that are left. But every year for the past over 80 years, They strip them naked and they measure all of the parts of them, right? And as you know, how many of y'all know whenever you get older, your ears get bigger? I thought yesterday, I'm going to ask the Lord, why do my ears get bigger, right? My nose, I don't really want these. I needed big ears when I was 16. Not when I'm 80, right? I was driving yesterday. I told the Lord, I said, I had problems hearing when I was 16. I don't need it when I'm 80. I couldn't hear you then. And then the Lord would get on me sometimes. He says, oh, you heard. You just didn't listen. And I said, okay, Jesus. So we're going to go hard like that. On 171, going to the church house to pray to you. You're going to come at me like that and talk about I wasn't listening, right? But they're measuring all these parts. They took these 238 sophomores in college and they started, it's the holy grail of human development research. It's the longest research study that has ever been in existence, and it's still going on. And they're taking all of this stuff and they want to learn about how and why humans develop and things transpire in our lives the way that they do. One particular doctor, and this is the guy that I was reading about, he was the curator, or he was over this study for 42 years. For 42 years, this was his job. His whole career, he worked with these 238 people. In 1955, they started meeting every other year because it was taking so long. Because just to do the math here, this particular guy would have to do 2 of these interviews, really 3 interviews a week, every week for 40 years. That was his life. For 40 years, he had to meet with 3 of these individuals, get all of their measurements, have them fill out this long questionnaire about everything of their life, and then compose all of this data. And there's an office building behind Fenway Park in Boston that houses all of these huge binders of information from these 238 individuals. So this guy, for 40 years of his life, his whole career, he takes this data and he looks at it, and he actually wrote a book about all of his findings. And I've been thumbing through and messing with this book a little bit because it's fascinating. But I almost quit reading it, or I needed to quit reading it, because I got to a point where the man, he says, listen, he says, we spent $20 million on this. We've been doing it for over 80 years. We've been following these people. He says, I've devoted my whole career to these individuals. 40 years of my life, I've been keeping up with this. He says, I'm going to reduce over 80 years and $20 million worth of data. I'm going to reduce all of that down, and I'm going to tell you what I learned after 40 years. And I'm going to tell you in just a few words what it is that if I could put it in a nutshell, that I have learned. And there was some cool stuff that I was fascinated with, right? One of the things they said that the greatest contributor to success later in life is if you had warm relationships as a child. That if you had warm relationships as a child, they actually said that the people in the study that had warm relationships as a child, on average, they made $141,000 more per year than the people that didn't have warm relationships as a child. How many of y'all know an extra $141K wouldn't hurt anybody, right? Now, these are all Harvard sophomores, so I mean, they're going to do pretty well anyway, right? But if they had healthy, happy relationships as a young person, as a child, they on average made more than $141,000. Stuff like that, I geeked out on. I thought, man, this is fascinating. I want to learn all this. But he says, even beyond all of that, all that's really neat. He says, if I could distill the whole study down to this, he says, this is what $20 million, 80 plus years, he says, all of it could be distilled down to this: happiness is love. Happiness is love. He said the people that allowed love into their heart and into their life, And he gives all these examples of different people he studied. He said, if you allow Jesus into your heart and he brought love, if you allowed an individual, a mom or dad, if you allowed a significant other into your heart, the people that allowed love in and expressed love out, the people that were lovers and not haters, everything came from that place. He says, if happiness is the cart, right? And we all want the cart of happiness, right? Everybody wants that cart, right? We want to ride in the happiness cart, or we want to bring the happiness cart. He says, if happiness is the goal, if happiness is the cart, love is the horse. That love is the horse that carries the cart of happiness. And I thought it was fascinating. Some people don't like mixing religion and science, right? They don't like that. They're like, blah, 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 right? They get real shame. But I love science and religion. I like to mix them because I think that they don't go against each other. I think that the word confirms science and science confirms the word. I believe it's just the facts. Because if you took your Bible, because there is one human research development study that's actually longer than 80-something years. This book right here, right, written by 40 different authors, 66 different books over the course of 1,500 years. This book right here, it's got in it over 400 names for God. Right? Jehovah Jireh, Jehovah Shalom, Jehovah Nisi, Jehovah Tsidkenu. You've got the Prince of Peace and the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning, the end, the Lion of the Judah. You know, there's over 400 names of God in this book right here. 1,500 years, 40 different authors, 66 different books. And you know how many volumes of study have been written about this book right here? Oh, my Lord. If you think of a room in the back of Fenway Park is filled with volumes of books of study, you know how many things have been written about this book? So if you were to, though, to distill all 1,500 years, if you were to distill all of this book down like Dr. George did, what would this book distill down to? Right, if you were to cook it down, right? How many of y'all made turnip greens? Glory to God in the highest. They're all just spilling out the top. But you got to keep cooking them, don't you? Put some bacon in there, y'all. Lots of bacon, right? Big chunks of cubey, thick pork belly, right? You just keep cooking it down, right? Cooking it down. If you kept cooking this baby down, and if you went from 400 names down to 100 names, down to 50 names, down to 25 names, if you could take the name of God down to just 3 little words. Happiness is love, $20 million, 80-something years, 238 people, all of these measurements of the SAG, right? All of these measurements of all of these things, all of these questionnaires result in happiness is love. If you could take all of it down, what would this book be? And we find it in 1 John. And it's the first verse. It's one of the few verses I'm going to give you this morning. 1 John chapter 4, verse 16. God is, everybody say it. If you could take all 400 names and just distill that down to what? God is love. He who abides in love abides in God. The whole book distilled down to all the Jehovah Shaloms, right? The Lord is my peace. Jehovah Jireh, the Lord is my supplier, right? Jehovah Nisi, Jehovah, all of these things, if you could distill all of that down into a different 3 words, you would find that our Bible teaches the same thing that Dr. George found out. Dr. George found out that everything is about love. What he didn't find out is the source of the love. And we find out right here that God is the source. Yesterday we grilled some burgers. My wife said amen to that. Really? Of all the things I've said so far, I say we grill burgers. And you're like, amen, glory to God in the highest. Yes, we grilled hamburgers yesterday. And the only mayonnaise at my house is Blue Plate. Let me come in. Listen, do not show up with Miracle Whip. That is not mayonnaise. I don't know what it is. It's sour white stuff. So, if y'all are Miracle Whip people, you can leave. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. My wife's in here, so I always have to get ruffle her feathers a little bit. You're welcome to stay. But I like to open a brand new thing of Blue Plate, and you tear that little foil off. Some people don't like mayonnaise. Some of y'all don't like mayonnaise. Really? That's the worst thing ever? Listen. Listen. The Heavenly River, it is mayonnaise. And it is Blue Plate. That's what it is. It's Blue Plate. But I like to crack open, right, a brand new fresh jar of some Blue Plate, right? So Blue Plate to me is mayonnaise. And if you could crack open a jar of love, that's God. Right? He is love. He doesn't have it. It's not a part of his character. No, he is love. And what I want to show you just for a couple minutes here is what this doctor basically discovered after a whole bunch of money and a lot of miles flown on a plane and a lot of visits and questionnaires and all that stuff is he found out what the Bible teaches us here. If you don't allow God's love in, you'll never go very far. And you can try money and you can try fame and drugs. And at 18, that's your aspiration, right? Is to just have money. But you can try a lot of stuff, but God is love. And until you allow that in, there's really no real happiness. Because happiness is God, and God is love. So the sooner that you can allow him in and love him and allow the love of God to penetrate the innermost part of your being and come to the realization that God loves me. And I don't deserve it, and I don't even know why. And I'm just speaking for myself because there's been plenty of times whenever I've sat in my easy chair and thought, I'm such an idiot. Why would you love me? And yet he's infatuated with me. And he's infatuated with you. If you look at the beauty of the Grand Canyon, right, or the oceans, or you think about the most majestic place on the planet, he made that just for something for you to enjoy. For something for you to look at and be enamored with. He made the sand to get in, to get in your toes because he knew you would like it. He didn't need sand, right? He made the jewels and the diamonds and the gold. He didn't make it for him. He made it for you. So the sooner that you can realize God really, really likes me, he loves me, he wants to be around me, that's the source of happiness. And without that, life is bland. Just doesn't have the taste of life. It doesn't have contentment. It doesn't have happiness. So this doctor, he found out, he says, listen, you've got to allow the love of God into you. And you've got to love, the second thing is you really got to love yourself. There's a problem that goes on in cultures, and it's really prevalent in our culture right now, is the lack of self-love. We have self-harm. Right? That's the big thing of our generation because it's a deception of the enemy. Because we don't think we have worth, which you do. God's enamored with you. Then we don't love ourselves, or we get hung up on past mistakes or sins or shortcomings, or I've wasted my life or whatever. So we don't allow a love of ourself to get really deep rooted. And I'll be the first to tell you, I got a lot of shortcomings, made a lot of mistakes, done a lot of stupid things. I did marry somebody awesome. Kudos to me. But besides that, right, I've done a lot of really just things that you just think like, God, that's so dumb. Noble, stop nodding. My son's on the front row going, that's exactly right. Right? And yeah, I still like me. I've learned to like me. I've learned to love me. I don't love everything that I think in my brain. Aren't you so glad that everybody don't know what you're thinking in your brain? Right? But because I have the ability to keep it in my brain, right, I have loved, and I've learned to love me. And then the last thing is learning to love others. Learning to allow things to roll off your back. Because Jesus said, listen, they hated me, they're going to hate you. Don't be surprised. They persecuted me, they're going to persecute you. Don't return evil for evil. Don't return railings for railings. You're going to have to learn to turn the other cheek. You're going to have to learn to walk away. You're going to have to learn not to let bitterness take a root in your life, or it's going to produce bitter fruit. You're going to have to learn how to allow forgiveness to come out of you, because if you don't forgive others, I can't forgive you. And if I can't forgive you, then there's a barrier of sin in between me and you, and your prayers won't even make it out of the room. And you're wondering why I'm not answering. And the reason I'm not answering is because I'm not hearing. And the reason I'm not hearing is because you have unforgiveness that you refuse to let go of something that happened 5 minutes or 5 years ago or 50 years ago. And your unforgiveness is tying my hands from intervening in your life. Happiness is a love. And the root of love is God. So the sooner that we can allow him in, the sooner that it works. Okay, so we're going to work in threes today. That's called trio, right? Because I just couldn't help but think, if he says happiness is love, we have God is love. How about this one? Love never what? Fails. Really interesting. You mean that 80-something years and $20 million is finding out the same thing that 1,500 years written by our master has said? The one thing that he says that won't fail is the very thing that the other guy found out was the seed of all happiness. And that is, God tells you really plainly, love never fails. He says prophecy, they're going to cease. Tongues is going to cease, and all that means is cease, or he says actually tongues will fail, prophecy will fail. That just means whenever you get to heaven, nobody's talking in tongues. And whenever you get to heaven, nobody's got a word. Right? Nobody's walking up to you on the streets of gold saying, I just have a word for you right now. You're going to do great things for God. I'm already here. I missed it. Right? Like, prophecies are going to fail. Tongues are going to fail, but he says, love never fails. This is the only thing that will never fail. It'll never cease. It'll never come to an end, is the love of God. What about this? What about where he says, these three shall always remain: faith, hope, and what? And then he says, and the greatest of these is what? Love. He says the greatest of faith, hope, and love is these. What's the point of all this? The point is that God teaches the same thing that these scientists from Harvard found out. It just didn't take him $20 million, right? He gave us the answer. He gave us the book. And science confirms that the sooner that we can start receiving God's love. God, I thank you that you love me today. With all my mess, all my past, everything that I did. Yeah, I had an abortion. Yeah, I did this. Yeah, I did that. And yet, God, you're still mindful of me. I'm still carved in the palm of your hand. The thoughts that you still think towards me are good thoughts, thoughts to prosper me and not to harm me, thoughts to give me a hope and an expected end. God, you still wish above all things that I would prosper and be in health, even as my soul would prosper. God, that the thoughts that you think towards me, they're more than the sands of the ocean. God, I allow your love to flood my heart and my life. God, you love me. And God, I love others. All their shortcomings, and they can't drive worth anything. Can't drive, Lord. And yet I love them. That's where happiness is. And whenever you get out of love, you get out of God, because God is love. Whenever you get into the other side of gossip, judgment, passing judgment on people, that's not where God is. In fact, I'm going to show you a couple scriptures and then I'm going to let you go. But this is it. Love never fails. Love never fails. Love never fails. The last little 3-word thing that I want to give you, and then I want to give you some practical things on how to do it. is in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 2. They're going to put it up on the screen. Ephesians verse number 5, verse 2. If you could distill all of the commandments, remember they made over 600 commandments. Right? God gave them 10, but that wasn't good enough for people, right? Because we always got to get in there and mess things up, right? God was like, don't kill, don't steal, don't commit adultery. And then they added like an extra 600, right? It was like, typical man, right? And yet Jesus came along and he said, forget all 600 of them. Forget all 600. If you'll do this one, you'll fulfill all 600. How many of y'all remember what the one is, right? It's the golden rule, right? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, all your strength. And the second one is what? Love your neighbor as yourself. If you'll just love, you fulfill all of it, and you'll be happy. It was interesting, they said in the study, they said that we watched the people that were very healthy in their 80s, and it was people that had loving relationships in their 50s. They outlived the other people exponentially. It wasn't even close. The people that loved the neighbor as their self, those are the people that had longer, more fulfilled, more happy, more helpful, and more money in their bank account were the lovers. It wasn't the haters. The haters didn't have it. The lovers did. And here, we're going to see here in Ephesians chapter 5, verse number 2, here's another 3-word thing right here. And this is where we're going to kind of land the plane today, is walk in what? As Christ loved us, he's given himself for us as an offering and a sacrifice to God for a sweet-smelling aroma. If you could distill all the commandments down, you just love people and love God. And here he says, the one thing that I want you to do, this is Paul writing to the church at Ephesus, he says, I just want you to walk in love. You don't have to memorize a bunch of stuff. Just walk in love. Okay, so how do we do that? Because this is what I'm going to leave you with, because all this is good, right? And it preaches really good, and it sounds really good, right? God is love, and He loves me, and allow that love to get in your heart, and it makes you feel warm and fuzzy inside, right? It's a good message we got going so far. But the real part that you have to walk out is the walking in love, because that's where it gets more difficult. Right? How many have ever turned the cheek before? Like, that's the tough part, right? Because you want to shoot them. Can I get a witness? Right? It's like, right? I want to hurt you more than you hurt me, right? Certainly don't want to turn the cheek. This is the hard part. All right, so how do we do it? How do we walk in love? 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Love is a choice, but love is a fruit. How many of y'all remember the Galatians 5:22, the 9 fruit of the Spirit? How many of y'all remember that? And the fruit of the Spirit is love, number 1, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. Against such there is no law. And yet the number 1 fruit of the Spirit is what? Love. The good news is that it's a fruit. The good news is that it can grow and develop. I'm a better person at walking in love today than I was whenever I first started walking with the Lord, right? If the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, the question that you have to ask yourself is, do I love more today than I did last year? Am I developing the fruit of love? Because that's where happiness is. Am I more patient now, or am I getting impatient with age, right? Am I getting more ornery the older I get? Or am I getting finer? I'm like a fine wine. I went from a bitter wine to now I'm aging with the fruit of the Spirit, right? Do I have more peace now than I used to have? Because these are the fruit of the Spirit. These are the things that we should be growing in. And we should be growing in our love walk, in walking in love. So I'm going to give you the definition, and most of you have heard this at a wedding. right? Because that's where we keep this passage. This is the wedding passage, right? This is where we hear this, like somebody's getting married and they always read the love passage. Let me all know you really don't need it on the wedding day. There's plenty of love on the wedding day. We're here because of love/lust on the wedding day, right? That's why we're here. The wedding day doesn't need the love. It's after you've been married 4 years, 6 years, 11 years. That's where the love walk really comes in. That's whenever this thing needs to develop and grow and get bigger and bigger and bigger. Because to have it on the wedding day, right, everybody's I haven't had anybody say no. Do you take her to be? No. Not once. I haven't had one time. I haven't been like, all the blood run out of me and be like, that's it, folks. We're going to have to take 5. I've never had that. There's always been this look and these tears. And it's just like having to hold till death do us part. Richer and poor and student loans. Do I take thee, right? That's whenever it's easy on that day. But this part right here is a part that's tough. That's why whenever we've had problems, we have to go back to 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 4 through 8. Read this every day. In your worship guide, I put this little thing right here. It's from a book called Love the Way to Victory by Kenneth Hagin. And my wife and I, we said this every day for probably at least 10 or 11 years, to where now we memorized it. I shall let the love of God shed abroad in my heart by the Holy Ghost. I shall endeavor to let the love of nature dominate me. Because I've said it so many times. I've said it thousands of times. Because this is where it's at. This is where the rubber meets the road. In fact, they'll put it up, but I didn't give you this one yet, but I'll give it to you. In 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse number 1, he says, eagerly pursue and seek to acquire love. Eagerly pursue and seek to acquire love. Make it your aim, your great quest. Earnestly desire and cultivate spiritual gifts. Sometimes in the church, we want the gifts, but we're jerks. And here he says, really go hard after love. Spiritual gifts come second to love. If you can't love people, then you totally miss it. It don't matter. He says you can give your body to be burned. You can understand all prophecies and have tongues, interpretation. He actually says you can understand when angels speak like their language. But he says if you don't have this, you're nothing. Really go after this. So I'm going to give you the definition, and the reason my wife and I read this so many years is just so that I didn't kill her. And there's the proof right there, sitting on the front row, alive and well. Had to bring her back from the dead a couple of times. But besides that, right, it's the reason why I was not murdered in the middle of the night. Is because we have memorized the love of God has been shed abroad in my heart by the Holy Ghost. I shall endeavor to let that love nature dominate me. I have God's love nature in my heart and in my spirit, and I will not let my natural human reasoning dominate me. I refuse to allow the flesh to rule me. I'm going to walk in the Spirit. By walking in love, I am a lover and not a hater. I will practice and exercise the fruit of love so that it will grow and increase. One way I will practice the God kind of love is by taking no thought for a suffered wrong. I will also practice thinking and saying the best of every person. Boy, it's tough. Boy, it's tough. But I'm telling you, whenever you get this down in your heart, right, whenever you want to say what you shouldn't say, the Lord will bring this back up to you. And you think, man, I wish I didn't memorize that. But the Lord will bring it back to you. Because you're going to have opportunity to think and say things that aren't the best. Even the president. Whichever president it may be. Obama or Trump or Bush or whatever, right? We have all opportunities. But he just says, I will practice developing this fruit of thinking and saying the best of every person so my love can grow and develop and I can be a blessing to many. I'll make the love of God my great quest in life For then my love shall abound, and God shall reap the glory. I will walk in God's love. I will not criticize others, because God's love works no ill to his neighbor. When I'm walking in God's love, I can claim God's best blessings in life. And I can attest to that. People say, man, you're blessed. The Lord's been good to you. This has really helped me allow the blessing of God be upon my life, is because there's another verse we won't even get to. He says, how can you say you love God who you can't see, but you don't love your brother who you can see? Good water doesn't come from a bad well. Good fruit doesn't come from a bitter tree. If you want to have good fruit, you got to have a good tree. Whole nother message. Not really, but don't have time to get into it. I can claim God's best blessings in life. I will be tenderhearted and forgiving, therefore I shall reap a blessing. I will keep my tongue from speaking evil and pursue peace with every man. I thank you, Father, that as I endeavor to grow in the fruit of love, you will help me be all that I can be in you. Really good. You ought to put it on your fridge when you get home and read it over your life. This is the definition of love. 1 Corinthians chapter 13. I'm going to read it real quick, verse number 1, so I can let you go. Though I speak with the tongues of men and angels, but I have not love, I've become sounding brass or a clanging cymbal. Though I have the gift of prophecy and I understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith so that I could remove mountains, but I have not love, I'm nothing. Though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned, but I have not love, it profits me nothing. Here's the definition. Love suffers. Close your Bible. Let's go home. Right? We could stop right there. Love's willing to suffer. He actually says love suffers long. Love's willing to suffer long. And is patient while suffering. And love is kind. How many have already found out this is going to be a difficult next couple of verses, right? It's like, golly. You mean when we're 15 minutes late and I'm suffering, I have to be patient and kind? Yes, Kevin, with your wife. Amen. Really? Something tells me I'm going to hear this again this week. Love suffers long, is kind. It does not envy. Love does not parade itself. It's not puffed up or arrogant, inflated with pride, is what Amplified would say. Love does not behave rudely, or it has good manners. Love does not seek its own. Love is not provoked. It's not always looking for a fight, and it doesn't have to have the last word, and it doesn't have to win. It's not easily provoked. Can it be provoked? Yeah, but it's not easy. I'm not just looking for a jump-off point to fight. Love doesn't behave, it's not puffed up, doesn't behave rudely. It does not seek its own. It's not provoked. Love, here's a big one, love thinks no evil. So he says, first he says it's in your behavior, but now he distills it down further. He says, how are you thinking about people? It thinks no evil. It doesn't rejoice at iniquity, but it rejoices in truth. It bears all things, it believes all things, it hopes all things, it endures all things. Love, here's our 3, never fails. They found out the same thing that we found out, right? That the key to happiness is allowing the love of God to penetrate you. Say, man, God loves me. I don't know why, but he does. And because he loves me first, now I can love other people. Because he forgives me, I can forgive other people. Because he's good to me, I can be good to other people. Because he doesn't judge me harshly, I don't have to judge them. I don't have to be provoked. Let me pray for you before we go. Thank you.